Welcome to What If Tests Weren't Multiple Choice, the Future of Assessments. This evening's Food for Thought and Food for Our Stomach is brought to us by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, which is based in Chicago. Where does the MacArthur Foundation rank among foundations? And he said, well, it depends on the day and the assets, but it's somewhere between 7th and 9th in the country. But clearly, the MacArthur Foundation is first in this area of looking at how the digital world, digital media, affects and continues to affect learning, teaching, assessment, and so on. Unfortunately, the Foundation's education program director had her flight canceled, Connie Yowell, so she cannot be with us this evening. She was going to be part of this panel. For those of you who did want to find out something about MacArthur, we can go to Andy as well. The MacArthur Foundation has been involved in supporting change in education for a very long time. And about 6 years ago, they made a major shift into digital media. And I'm going to quote from a letter that Connie wrote in a publication that I think is on your desks, or on your seats. In 2004, after 26 years of significant investment in traditional school reform, with less success than we had hoped for, I think you might all understand those sentiments, the MacArthur Foundation stepped back to consider alternative paths. Rather than focus on schools, we turned our attention to learning, specifically how young people are learning outside of school as they participate with digital media. We soon discovered that a dramatic transformation is underway in how young people think, learn, socialize, and engage in civic life. This evening, we're going to talk about assessment. And I asked our panelists, I said, why are we starting with assessment? What did you want to start with? What people are learning and how they learned. And they said something else that I think we all are familiar with, which is that teaching is not going to change until assessment changes. So that's why we're talking about assessment this evening. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the two panelists, and they will make their presentations, and then we have a microphone right there. If you have a question, please come get in line. The first speaker is going to be James G. He is a professor of literacy studies at Arizona State University. His most recent book deals with video games, language, and learning. That book, called What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy, argues that good video games are designed to enhance learning. I asked Professor G, what were you doing 10, 15 years ago, and how did you get into this arena? And he said he started out as a theoretical linguist. I can't exactly tell you what that means, but it has something to do with mathematical language. And he said he wasn't involved in education at all, but he eventually ended up dealing with education and the digital world through his 6-year-old son. Got into video games. Daniel Schwartz, our second speaker, is professor of education at Stanford University, and he is the co-director of the Science of Learning Center, Learning in Informal and Formal Environments. A theme throughout his research is how people's facility for spatial thinking, and he can explain what that means, can influence processes of learning, instruction, assessment, and problem solving. His background includes secondary school teaching in Kenya, inner city Los Angeles, and the Alaskan bush. And I asked him the same question, how did you get into this field? And he said that he had been teaching in an Indian village in Alaska for about 5 years, and the Apple IIe computer arrived, and he said he finally saw that there was some good of his undergraduate degree in philosophy, which was that it helped him with computer programming. So let us begin. James Gee.
Thank you. I'm going to try to keep this short so that we can really focus on questions. But let me tell you that, therefore, since it will be short, what the punchline will be in the end. That I want to argue to you that in education, we're very much in the same situation we are with energy. That as we've stuck a long time with an old style of energy, that now is going to screw us because we need new sources of energy, but it's also going to leave us out of an emerging market for new energy, right? Where the same thing I think is in education is not only by sticking with this old model are we hurting ourselves, but there's going to be an emerging market for new learning and new assessment, which I will talk about a little bit, and we're going to be locked out of that market if we don't get going on this. All right, now, does anybody know what this, the picture's a little dark, but this will test whether what your popular culture IQ is. What is this? Anybody know? That's World of Warcraft, very good. World of Warcraft is the most played multiplayer game in the world. You play it in teams of 5 or more with hundreds or thousands of other people. And this company, if you don't think this is significant, this company rakes in about $1 billion an hour. So they're pretty significant. Now, I want to argue to you that, see, people have pushed games as a model for learning and assessment, not because we're trying to say you have to learn through a game, but because the only place that is truly using the new digital technology for its full power of how it can recruit new learning and new assessment is in the game industry. I mean, it was sad. It would be nice if it was in our schools, and I wouldn't have to put up a slide about elves. But so let me just tell you, what does learning and assessment look like when you start using a game like this, and then think about what would that mean to have it look that way in our schools. Now, before I say that, though, let me tell you what I think the problem of American schools are and how that ties to the MacArthur agenda. Our schools are largely about what you might call a content fetish. That is, they teach information in formulas and they test them on written tests. And we've known since the 70s with ample research that if you have that sort of system, you can get people to pass tests. That's not a problem. But you cannot, it does not correlate with them being able to solve problems. So a person, I mean, it's a nice piece of research. It's from the 80s that showed that kids with A's in physics in college, who had already had physics in high school, could write down Newton's laws of motion, but couldn't use them to solve an actual problem, like how many forces are acting on a coin when you throw it in the air. And they could actually deduce that from Newton's laws of motion. They still couldn't apply them to the world. So now, as you know, if you've read Tom Friedman's Flat World book, we're worried about what it means for a developed society to have a bunch of people who can't solve problems, let alone innovate, which will be required for any developed country because standard skills can be trained anyway in the world and done at low-cost centers. So I think it's not even a politically polarized issue that we need to start to move our schools to innovation and to problem solving, especially in a world where, as you see, complex systems continue to hurt us, and we need deep problem solving. So, and I'm going to say a bit in a minute about 21st century skills. You all know there's a tremendous amount of hype about 21st century skills. It's kind of sad that problem solving is one of them. The others are things like innovation, collaboration, and system thinking. System thinking meaning you can handle more than one variable at a time. You know, I would love to elaborate on this, but you think of, I mean, Alan Greenspan, probably the biggest expert in economics in the 20th century, said when the economic collapse happened, he had no idea why. Nothing had taught him why it would happen, and he could never have predicted it. Someday, a book I predict will be written on Alan Greenspan, and the title of that book will be The Last Expert. Because today, an expert who can't collaborate and can't use distributed learning and tools and can't pool his knowledge with other disciplines is really dangerous to us. Anybody who knew as little about human nature as that is dangerous. Now, so there is this motif that people want 21st century skills. Now, MacArthur has spent a lot of money to try to push a new form of learning. That is, learning where people can actually solve problems collaboratively and use digital tools to engage in professional practice, even at early years, to get these 21st century skills. But it dawned on them, and I think all you admit, that it's very difficult to push a new model of learning in a school system where people are teaching a certain way because they're teaching to tests. Furthermore, the foundation did not want its 21st century ways of learning coming out and being judged by these 19th century paper and pencil multiple choice assessments. So they got interested in saying, look, I mean, we've got to simultaneously push both a model of learning and a new model of assessment. One of the things you're going to see in this is the models of assessment that are truly new, that we should be pioneering outside of World of Warcraft, actually, it's very hard to tell where learning ends and assessment starts. So let me just give you very quickly examples. World of Warcraft, first of all, if you don't play video games, which is too bad, but if you don't, all a video game is problem solving, right? Think about it. It's just a set of problems and a reward for solving them. There's nothing else to it. In fact, one way, although you never say this to your kid, a video game is nothing but one test after another. It's just an assessment after, there's the boss, you lose, you got an F, now you go for your C, and then you go for your B. But it doesn't say that on the box. They're smart enough not to put that on there. So first of all, video games do not teach facts, they teach problem solving. That doesn't mean that in a game like Civilization or any other game, you don't recruit a ton of facts. But you recruit them as tools to solve problems. The interesting thing is if you go after problem solving, you get facts free because you got to use them to solve the problems. But if you go after facts, you might get the facts, but you don't get problem solving. The second thing is that these digital media collect copious data. That is, they can collect everything you're doing and analyze it 7 ways to Sunday, and you as a player may never see it. But that data is, and they can be collecting it from thousands of people, so they could know how are you developing and how does it compare with everybody else, and are you on the same trajectory? So one of the people in our, Valerie Schutt, on our assessment team, she's working on a form of assessment where the assessment data would be collected and it would say, you're on a path to success, but by the way, there were more innovative paths. There's these other people who actually are finding more innovative solutions, and you're going to get an innovation score as well as a thing. Now, this copious data is the biggest contribution of this digital media because it's the one that truly will put the testing industry out of business, which I'll get to at the end. The other thing is that when World of Warcraft is collecting copious data, it's never collecting one variable. It's collecting information on hundreds of variables. By the way, this game is statistically so complicated that's really you as a player are trying to manage statistical variables about every member of your team over tons of skills, tons of stuff, and so it's tracking multiple variables. So it's not giving you an A, it actually knows how on many different factors you compare. It's much more complicated than getting an A or a B. Now, we have in our assessment world today what are called status models. That, think about this. We say a teacher is going to be rewarded for how many of her children go past a certain gate, which some assessment people call a status. And that gate is labeled proficient. But actually, we don't use the NAEP proficiency, which is legitimate. We let the states make up what is proficient, which means they gamed every test, and it means their test scores go up and the NAEP scores don't go up at all. But think about it. A kid could have made miles of progress, but if he didn't go past proficient, she gets punished. And if Johnny was 2 inches from proficient, she gets rewarded. Growth models would say you should reward people for how much development they made, how far have they gone. In collecting this copious data in a thing like World of Warcraft, it knows how long you played, how much progress you've had, what your trajectory is, but it also knows how many because you level up. It knows every status you've had, not arbitrary ones like proficient, but ones said this is a stage, when you get here, you're capable of doing more stuff. So what it is a combined growth status model. It's saying which stages, like for example, let's say you knew the stages of learning algebra. Then you want to know for a teacher, how much has Johnny developed and how many of the gates or stages of learning algebra has he been by? That would be a legitimate stuff. Growth status models are in the cutting edge of educational research. We have to have commissions to do them. They'll probably be in our schools in about 40 years, but they're in every digital media. Now, if you think about it, you know that assessment people have always made this big distinction between formative assessment and evaluative. Formative is giving you, the learner, the information back to develop yourself. And evaluative is sorting you, telling you, you're good, bad, or indifferent. But in fact, when you're collecting copious information, you know what somebody did for thousands of hours and how many stages they went through and how much growth they made and how they compared to everybody else. That information is the best information to give them to develop. But it's also the best information to truly judge whether they're any good, right? You see that evaluative and formative assessment begin to collapse. And finally, of course, World of Warcraft, even if you're playing this game about elves, it does reward innovation, right? Because you're playing against people who are very good, and therefore you have to find innovative solutions to the problems. You cannot do it non-collaboratively very easily. You don't go into a dungeon by yourself unless you're a masochist. You must collaborate, and you must engage in system thinking, because if you can't track all the variables in your head and think of all the different consequences, then you will last 11 seconds. So here it is based on, and of course it is about problem solving. Now here's the other beauty. If you go back to this thing here, I guess I can't go back. Daniel, help me. Thank you. This thing, I'm not going to take the time to tell you, but if you, this screen is the game, but notice you can't see it because it's got all this junk on top of the little elves. And that's are all called player mods. Those are all pieces of software made by the players themselves that are meant to be slapped on the screen while you're playing so that you can strategize, theorize, and abstract your thinking and strategy while playing. Built by the community. See, so another key to assessment is you could actually create a community that is so good at this learning that they build the learning and assessment, and then we can put all of us out of business. By the way, this is a good way to make money, because when your people make the stuff for you, you don't pay them. It's a great deal. All right, let me close with this. So here is any of you ever played a real-time strategy game like Rise of the Nation, Age of Empire? Or a strategy game like Civilization? You guys don't game much, do you? I hope you're not writing about our children. So a real-time strategy game is you have to track dozens of variables in your civilization from the earliest age, where you got like one little peasant, up to the nuclear age. You have to go through all the age, you have to go through thousands of years. So kids in a game like this make a decision that no leader has ever had to make. Should I invest in technology now or wait 500 years? That's sort of, you know, by the way, that's getting to be something that our presidents ought to think about. Long-term planning, we plan for about 12 seconds now in the United States. Now, so in this game, you run your civilization. It's technology, it's religion, it's taxation, it's warfare, it's diplomacy, against up to 5 other civilizations played by real people or the computer, and for hours. And after you play, you get what I'm about to show you, a whole bunch of graphs. Now, this is only going to show me against one other civilization, because I'm not smart enough to beat 5 at a time. You have to be a 7-year-old to do that. Now, I just want to show you. This is what it's doing is it's graphing everything you did on all the variables to show you across time how you compared on all those variables to the other players. This is just 2 civilizations on all these variables. Does this look like something kids do for fun? Yeah, this is people sell this to children. See, so what is that doing? That's a set of charts, graphs, and stuff, because it's saying you better start to theorize your play, and therefore you better be abstracting and relating these variables so that you can make a better strategy. And kids pore over this data to get better. You just saw a 21st century assessment. If you want to know how good that kid is, those graphs tell you more. That means meaningless to say he has an 80 or a C. That tells you what he did, but it's exactly the information the kid is learning. Furthermore, think about a type of learning that makes the child have to abstract a theory from the game on hundreds of variables, right? So now the kicker of this is this, that when you design assessment this way, it's no different than learning. See, think about it. If you played a game like Halo, which is legendary. This is one of the hardest things you could do. For like 50 hours, it's mind-blowingly hard. So imagine somebody played Halo on Legendary, and then you said, okay, now we're going to give him a Halo test to see if he's any good. It's ridiculous. But we don't think it's ridiculous if the person's done 12 weeks of algebra to give him a test. Why? We trust the designers of Halo much more than we do our teachers, because we've de-skilled them. If you build learning this way, people don't get to progress unless they've already passed the assessment. By the way, it's like old total quality control in an auto factory. Fix the error before it gets to the end of the assembly line. Now, what I want to argue to you is this, and the MacArthur Foundation is very well aware of this, learning is the next biotech, because learning is going to be sold in digital media 24/7 across all institutions. And if we end up as out of date in this area as in some of our other areas, we're going to miss a huge economic opportunity, because learning is no longer something about school. It's about 24/7, 306 degrees, multiple institutions, and information across all that will be pulled together. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Listen up. Thank you.
So I don't get let out very much, but when I do, I like to remind people what school is like. So we're going to start with a test. And of course, this is a test which is going to be excruciatingly hard. And so here's your first question. I'm going to show you a California state standard for US history in 11th grade. And your job is to predict what's the item that's on the test to measure that. Okay? So here's the standard. I'll let you read it. It has too many syllables for me, but you can just read it. So as standards go, this is okay. Okay, so down at the bottom is the standard. Here's part of the item. It shows the New Jersey plan with equal representation for all states, then the Virginia plan, and then there's a box. Then at the bottom it has US Congress. And the student's task is to choose which of these four. And this is the item to assess that standard. So let me give you question number 2. I'm going to show you the item, and you have to decide what was the standard that that item was designed for. Anybody gets this, they get an A. So here's the item. If you're thinking kelp, you're wrong. Okay, again, here's the item at the bottom. Here's the standard. So you might notice that the standards are quite good, but the items are just sort of obscure facts. So what's the point? The learning frameworks and standards are often very well crafted. The 21st century skills, those lists, they're pretty good, a little vague, but they're good. California state standards are also pretty good. But if you're a student or a parent or a teacher, the test items are the raw data that define your beliefs about what counts as learning. So there's a big mismatch. So the items on the test create public beliefs about learning. I have a little picture of Jeopardy there. So let me talk about this. We talk about assessments often in policy, about comparing students, teachers, schools, nations, and that's really important stuff for the people who make decisions for us. But the public idea of what counts as learning has very big effects as well. And our evidence for what counts as learning is what shows up on the tests, because this is what people have operationalized learning as. So this is an interesting graph. I need to explain it to you a little bit. It's from an international comparison, a test that was given to students of many nations. And on the vertical axis is how well the nation did on this test on average. So up at the top, you can't see it, is Korea. Because we're competitive, I'll show you, there's the United States. We're in the middle, we're not at the bottom. The interesting part about this is the horizontal axis. This represents the percent of students in that nation who have a positive attitude towards science. So what you can see is that the Korean students who are doing the best on the test like science the least. And the students who are doing the worst on the test in nations like science the most. Let me just show you one from math. This was a very simple question. I like math, and that's what the students answered. Each letter represents a nation. The survey did not say yup in the lower right corner there. So each letter shows a nation, and again, you can see that the nations that do the best at math like it the least. So there's 2 things to notice about this. The first is the standardized test completely missed one of the most important learning variables, motivation. Our assessments don't pick this up, but we know that interest in 8th grade predicts science careers better than school grades. The second thing to notice is that the side effects of the tests themselves are probably driving that inverse correlation. The tests, the people who've taken the tests the most understand what learning's supposed to be in that domain, in science or math, and they don't like it. Right? And so this is one explanation of the result of this. So this isn't a very attractive story for lifelong learning. So how can we change people's beliefs about useful learning? So let me show you, here's a diagram that comes from the center that I'm a part of that's looking at learning in informal environments. The red represents the % of waking hours that you spend in school. So you can see, from 1st to 12th grade, you spend about 18.5% your waking hours. The numbers can vary a little bit. The blue represents all the time out of school, like weekends, vacations, and so forth. And so school has pretty much heavy lifting to do here. The idea that that red is going to train you for everything in the blue you need to know is probably misguided. So really what we should be assessing is not how well kids are learning the stuff in the red, but how prepared they are to learn when they get into the blue. So we should be assessing whether students are being prepared to continue learning and adapting. Unfortunately, our current assessments emphasize problem solving, not learning. So they have a common format, which we've called sequestered problem solving. Like a jury, the student's sequestered from any contaminating influences when they take the test. And so talking to another person or checking resources and facts would be cheating. Of course, if you didn't do that in the world, you'd be absolutely foolish. So the bottom line is people take tests with no opportunity to learn during the test. The emphasis is on correctness, speed, lack of variability. Basically, how well can you replicate what you've already done? And so these assessments can be misleading if the goal is to see who's more likely to continue learning. I'll give you a little thought experiment on this. So every couple of years, you'll see this on TV. A reporter will be talking to a Harvard student who's just graduated, right? They've got a cap and gown, they're kind of drunk maybe. And they ask him this question, they say, so what causes the seasons to change? And the Harvard student says something like, because it's cloudier, or because the Earth's closer to the sun. Those are wrong answers. And we feel kind of smug because this very elite education didn't prepare them to answer questions any better than high school students. And so this is sequestered problem solving. If we really wanted to find the value of the Harvard education, we'd have to take a different approach, which we call a preparation for future learning assessment, or PFL. We say, what can they learn during the assessment? For example, we give them something to learn from. So in this case, it'd be pretty easy. Give these two groups a day to learn the answer, and who do you think is going to do better? Right? The Harvard students will probably get a much deeper understanding of what causes the seasons on this planet as well as others. And so this would make it a PFL assessment if you give them a chance to learn during the test. So let me just give one tiny piece of actual empirical data on this point. Here's a study where one group of students had to come up, innovate their own solutions to problems, and then they got told the standard solutions. This was in statistics. The other condition replicated what goes on with millions of students every day, hour after hour, which is they're told how to do it, and then they practice on problems. So this was pretty long. It's like a month of an instruction at the end, because I like to give tests like I give to you. They had a very long test, and at the end of this test was a problem that was past the edge of what they'd been taught. And so you can see that both conditions look about the same on this sequestered assessment. Just how well could they problem solve this thing that they hadn't seen? We did a little trick so that half the tests actually had a resource in the middle of the test. It was a worked example that they could sort of follow to solve some other problem. And the question was, would they learn from this? Because all of them followed it quite well. And so what you find is from the standard tell and practice instruction, students were not prepared to learn from this example when it showed up. The students who were in the secret sauce condition, where they had a chance to innovate first, learned a great deal from this, and they were able to apply it in a new situation. So these PFL assessments can reveal properties of instruction that are missed by standard assessments, and they're also closer to what we care about, which is our students in a position to keep learning and adapting. So I have a hypothesis. I don't know how I'll ever test it, but I think if test items measured students' abilities to learn and adapt, beliefs about what would count as useful learning would change. Useful learning wouldn't be seen as memorization, and teaching the test would be good, right? Because if I'm teaching my students to prepare to learn something new on the test, that's a good thing. So where does technology fit in this? Because I recently discovered this was supposed to be a talk about technology. Part of the goal here is we want to change people's beliefs about what constitutes good learning. James's presentation, I think, did a great job of that. So one use of technology is to make computer adaptive testing. These make sequestered problem-solving assessments easier to administer, not better. They're just able to figure out what you can solve on your own faster by calibrating back and forth. But it's the standard kind of test. How fast can you solve it? Can you be accurate? Another approach is to make assessments built into the learning, not after, right? And this is part of this PFL idea. So let me talk about one example of a technology. This is called a Teachable Agent. Students get an agent shown in a little corner there, and they can customize how the agent looks. They can name their agent, and they can give it, little expressions that it can use when it does things. And then the way they teach their agent is they put in the little boxes that say things like cars, fossil fuels, factories, and they connect them with links, how they're supposed to be related. And once they've connected them up, the agent has some simple artificial intelligence underneath, so it can reason based on how well it's been taught. So in this picture, the agent is answering the question, if garbage increases, what happens to heat radiation? So this was a map about global warming. And you can see the agent says, if garbage increases, landfills increase, methane increases, greenhouse gases increase, which is a type of insulation which blocks heat radiation, so heat radiation goes down. So this is how the agent works. Once they taught their agent, they can play a game. Each of these characters is one of the teachable agents. Kids are at home, they're playing online, and they're wagering on whether their agent will get the answers right, asked by the retro game show host. Okay? So you find some interesting things when you do this. So we had students do work with the agents, and then they completed a multiple choice test on the topic, like on global warming. But then we also gave the test to the agent, where we asked it every possible question, because it's a computer and it's happy to answer every question you can give it. Here's what you find. You find that the student score and the agent score are extremely well correlated. But maybe there's something about multiple choice that isn't right. So we asked students to write a summary of what they've learned. And we use a rubric and we score that. And it turns out that's well correlated with how the agent did as well. And in fact, the agent predicts the student scores on each of these tests better than those two tests predict each other. Right? So the agent is tapping into the student's understanding. It's a better construct of their knowledge than the test that we gave them. So there were actually 3 types of assessments that we do in this work. One is the one that's integrated in the learning activity. So we're testing the agent, not the kid. Another is these PFL, preparation for future learning assessments. The students who taught their agents were more prepared to learn better from a new lesson on another topic and without technology in school. So this is a nice kind of finding because it shows you how you can cash out the value of games. Games are not curriculum aligned, so any game the kid plays at home, it's not going to show up on a test. But if we consider maybe the games are preparing them to learn better when they get some instruction, then we can detect that kind of effect. The third thing that goes on is what we're working on right now, which are choice-based assessments. So in this environment, kids can chat, they can teach, they can read, they can play the game show. There's lots of things they can do in this world. I just showed you a couple of screenshots. Turns out, if we look at what they choose to do, we can predict how well they're learning without ever giving them a test. We can just look at what they choose to do. So these choice-based assessments, looking at how people choose to spend their time, seem more aligned with the goals of preparing students to learn and adapt when they're no longer in school using a scripted curriculum that allows no choice. So the proposal is that if we create environments where students can make learning choices, they'll learn how to do it, and they'll provide excellent assessments that are aligned with the goals we want from once they leave school. So in summary, test items are the data that John Q. Public uses to conceptualize learning. The fact that people accept them, including policymakers, does not mean they are in alignment with the findings from any of the sciences that study the nature of learning. But this is what we see. This is what we were raised on. It's hard to overcome that. We need to change assessment items so people have examples of what looks like good learning. Second, our current tests emphasize recall and execution, not learning. If you ask me, the 21st century skill is the ability to learn and adapt, and this is in the blue. This is possible to measure. I gave you a couple of examples. Simple, give people a chance to learn during instruction or a test, and you'll find out. There's a lot of ways to do this. Third, technologies can provide new models of assessment. I think James' presentation did a great job of that. Or they can entrench old models. So they can take the way we've tested and refine it, so it's just faster. And once it's faster, it's hard to let go of it. So I think the new technologies support assessments of people's choices of whether, what, when, and how to learn. I think you could find that in World of Warcraft if we tweaked it a little bit. Choice-based assessments would change public beliefs and discourse about useful learning. Good learning is learning to make good choices about learning, not about remembering things. Thank you.
Don't be shy about coming to the microphone to ask a question, any kind of question at all. This just seems so far beyond what we write about and what we know about schools and learning and so on. How would you like to see what the work you are doing influence what's happening in schools, around schools? I mean, what would you like to see happen?
Well, there's something I'd like to push. I don't think we're going to, well, let me back up. There's a choice of strategies here that I think people are really differing on. One strategy is, let's take our innovations to the center of the school system and spread them as fast and quickly as we can. People believe that this current school system as it is will just co-opt those innovations and make them, as Dan said, just better ways to do the old thing. Another strategy is let's make these innovative learning and assessment tools and put them at the margins in places that will tolerate innovation and then show it works. Now, if you think about it, in technology outside of schools, going to the margins first and to the center has always been the way innovation happens. The only place we've ever tried to keep putting the new thing right in the center once is in schooling, and it's never worked. So what I would love to see is, even though I know we're going to spend all this money and race to the top and stuff, and it looks like we're going to make a better accountability regime, but it's not going to be a paradigm-breaking thing, that at least we hive off some of the money for a national center that would trial these new assessments, show they work in places that tolerate innovation, and then spread them there at just the way you would want. If we have to keep coal and oil, let's at least have something trying out new forms of energy, so that we're ready for these markets, but also we can prove they work. If we don't do that, we're just going to get a better mousetrap.
You want to jump in on that? Thank you. Do you see ways in which your work is beginning to influence anything, anywhere?
Dan, you've done the real work.
Yeah, I think so. So, for example, now they're trying to make, there's bids for large assessment consortiums, right, as part of Race to the Top. And some of these ideas that we sort of sweat to prove are filtering in. This idea that maybe we should give students a chance to learn during the test. And that's kind of showing up. So that may be one way to get in. I agree with James. The technology is an interesting backdoor in some ways. So, for example, in this teachable agent environment, what we've done is we've kind of made homework some bridge between school and home fund. So homework's kind of a dirty secret in most instructional endeavors, that it takes the absolute worst of school, isolated seat work, and it plops it in the middle of home, right? And so kids don't like it. By third grade, kids are as stressed about homework as anything. People like homework less than chores. They like it less than schoolwork. So what we try to do is make a homework environment that's sort of like a game, right? And so it's fun. They get to chat and collaborate with each other. And so it's sort of working on the margins, the way James is talking. See if there's a way to get in. I'm a little more direct, where I get the vector going from home back into school, as opposed to just completely going into the informal space.
Okay.
Dan's being a little humble here. The preparation for future learning stuff is probably the key idea that's existed on new idea into assessment in the last 20 years, and the choice thing will be the next one. The choice thing, I think, is a really totally innovative idea. What he's showing is that you paid for this, you're going to get it. He didn't tell you this, but if you give people a test of their knowledge and a test of what choices they made of how to learn in a domain, the knowledge test doesn't predict the choice test, but the choice test predicts the knowledge test. And it predicts preparation for future learning. And it's cheaper. So, I mean, you know, it's a great idea. But the preparation for future learning thing, if you haven't heard about it, I mean, it's core to any new assessment, and it's been immensely influential, except with McGraw-Hill, you know.
Okay, well, if, you know, these consortia maybe start, you know, using these ideas, you come up with a test, but then what do schools do with this? I mean,
What you hope you do if you have this idea of going to the margins, for example, there are many charter schools that are using this stuff because they have a little bit more freedom. Some of them can tolerate innovation. We can not only show it works, but then put pressure on the people. As Dan said, people need to change their view of what is mainstream learning. And once we show to parents, hey, here's your kid, and we can tell he's being prepared as a lifelong learner. He can learn in that blue period. He can innovate. He can collaborate. He's ready for the 21st century. Or you can keep this multiple choice test. Then we'll go to the center. It's a public demonstration.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have no evidence of this, but I do think the public beliefs about what counts as learning is very problematic. And when I talk to the people who make the assessments, they're starting to assess very complex things like metacognition, which is quite abstract. And I've asked them, are you doing anything to help the public understand what it is you're assessing? And the answer is no, right? And so nobody quite knows what learning is anymore, and so we like Jeopardy.
Yeah, right. You know, one thing I wanted to say relative to you actually explained for me. I was in Korea recently doing work with the government on games and learning, and I said to a big audience of Koreans, but you know, you keep winning all the math and science tests, so I don't imagine you really want to change your school system. And they said, oh, we do. We're very unhappy with the school system. They didn't think it's giving rise to innovation. You're showing it doesn't even give rise to people wanting to do the thing. So we keep racing to catch the Koreans who are trying to race away from what they're doing.
good, thank you.
Can you hear me? You know, I guess for a lot of us.
Who are you, Greg?
Oh, sorry, I'm Greg Topo from USA Today. I can barely even get out a thought here. You know, for a lot of us covering this stuff, the idea of 21st century skills, you know, collaboration and problem solving it's kind of hinky. I mean, there's a way in which it's kind of snake oil in some ways. I mean, isn't that what your first job is for, right? To learn to collaborate and work with, you know, your coworkers. I mean, I guess I'm thinking, you know, time is short in school, and there's a lot of content that kids need to learn. And I'm wondering, you know, with a model like, you know, the Halo model or the World of Warcraft model, I mean, there's a way in which I think we'd all love to be able to apply that to, you know, I don't know, reading Tolstoy. I guess I'm maybe just wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about that. I mean, you can't really make like Anna Karenina into a video game. Or maybe you can. Maybe it would be a really good video game.
We're not, as I said at the beginning, I'm not advocating making a video game. I'm advocating, see, I think you and I probably really disagree because I don't see the point of a school system based on content nobody retains past 6 months in school and can't use to solve a real problem. Those people, by the way, who couldn't use the physics to solve real problems were civil engineering. They were majoring in civil engineering. I've never gone over a bridge since I read that study. You know, I really don't want people, I mean, and see, you know, I know the American system, and this was a time in which, you know, before the information glut, there was a time in which our view that schools should be about what every American ought to know. For example, the curriculum ought to be whatever every American ought to know about science. And we've been successful at that. Every American does know the same stuff about science, namely nothing. So in this age, I think it's really important that people can know something deep, can collaborate with somebody else who knows something deep, the way you do in World of Warcraft, and can teach what they know and is prepared to learn more when they have to. I think that's a better thing for the 21st century. There are people who believe schools should still be about this kind of standardized content, and we're probably just going to disagree about that. I would predict that if you just stress that standardized content for your kid, and you're not in that blue zone when that kid is in school getting these 21st century skills, by which I mean the ability to actually solve problems or make good choices in Dan's part, your kid will be working at Walmart. But we can test that by watching it. So I think there's just a real profound disagreement. I don't see teaching directly to the content. Now, So I want people able to use the facts they're getting in school to look at the world in a new way, to make good choices, to do stuff. This thing about 21st century, I agree with you. A lot of it is hyped, but the businesses keep complaining that the people aren't able to collaborate, aren't able to pool knowledge with each other, and they have to train them. So I think we probably just disagree on that.
I have a quicker. Did you just say that everything right now is fine the way it is?
No, I'm not gonna.
Throw it back to him. Go ahead.
Look,
No, I'm not
school
gonna
is
say everything's
School
fine.
is not life. We
Right.
need to get some basic facts. They get on the job, that's when they're going to learn everything else.
Well, more than basic facts, even. I mean, read great things and do
Yeah, so,
important experiments and learn about history and science. I mean,
yeah, so the
it's
question
not
is
standardized stuff.
The question
Yes,
is what's packed into that word learn, right? Does learn here mean what the test tests? Or does learn mean something else and the tests are missing it? And in fact, the public's not very clear on what they mean by learn that stuff, right? I mean, that's kind of the challenge here. No, my kid learned history, I know it because he got an A.
I guess we're kind of in agreement about the fact that the tests stink. I guess well, maybe we can talk about this later. I want to let other people. Go ahead.
Introduce yourself, please.
Kathy Barron with Edutopia. So my question is, Professor Schwartz, is that, you were talking about how the standards are good, but a lot of people feel that the standards, particularly in the United States, are just overwhelming, that there are too many. Linda Darling-Hammond says that they're a mile wide and an inch deep, and many of the countries that do well, I don't know, now it's hard to say. I was going to say that do well have fewer standards, but in many countries it's true that they don't have, they have concepts, you learn the concept, and just as you were discussing with the test, you build on the concept. We don't do that, so how do you mix that?
I would agree with you. I think the standards can be improved a lot. But for most of the public, it's not the standards, it's the evidence for how they think about these things. The items are really the problem. In fact, when they make assessment frameworks, they debate a long time about what are the standards, what's the rows and cells, and then they ship it off to somebody else to make the items. So I do think the standards can be improved. I, like you, am a fan of sort of get a couple of good things deeply and follow it through, right?
But if the test, I mean, are you going to advocate for that or just to advocate to change the test? Because I'm not sure how you can
in
have
a 12-minute talk?
No, but I mean, when you are, in your writing and whatever, discussions with policymakers, that type of thing.
Yeah, I would advocate for certain types of goals for learning, certain types of content that you cover and how you cover it in the domains that I know about, which happen to be teaching math and science.
So how would you see it differently in this country than it is now, though?
Well, right now it's a mess. I mean, it's sort of what's convenient in the textbook. So we do this science and we try and map to the standards, and so there's the standards, the kids should know what hypothesis testing is, and there's this 400-page textbook, and on page 39 in a little call-out box, there's a definition of hypothesis testing, right? I mean, that's what nobody intended. That's what, nobody wanted that, but somehow that's what got translated. So right now I'm sort of looking more at the people on the ground that are making the things that directly touch the lives of students as opposed to the policy people who are doing something else. They're looking for what works best given what we already have, things like that.
So you're looking for grassroots revolt among the...
A little insight would be okay. Maybe not revolt, but a little insight would be good.
Let me say something to that about the grassroots revolt. In the country today, lots of upper middle class families are aware of everything we've said, and they are resourcing their children with a tremendous amount of technologically enhanced learning, not to make it technological, but to get them to be able to deal with copious information, innovate. They write their own fan fiction, they make their machinima, they're pro-ams, they're picking up high-tech skills. Research is just coming out that shows that correlates with class very heavily. So what we now have is two school systems. We have one with wealthy parents who use the schools for the basics and supply their kids this situated learning, that is learning based around actually being able to do stuff and recruit facts and knowledge and reading to do that. And other people have to go to school to get it all, and they don't get the rest of it. So we're already doing it. I mean, I'm sure if you have a child, your child, you are not relying on the school to give that child everything. But many families do have to rely on that.
Next up. Next question.
I'm JoLynn Martinez, and the discussion of assessment's interesting to me because I'm in graduate school working on my alternative certification, and I just took my assessment course, and we talked about things about constructed response and multiple choice and portfolio and performance-based assessment, and the professors were telling us that of course, the portfolio-based and performance-based assessments were highly desirable, but as teachers, would we actually have time to administer those assessments? And I think that speaks to the expectations of the public. They want to see those grades, the A's, the B's, the C's, based on the constructive response and multiple choice, because that's what they're familiar with. And I keep saying as I'm going through the School of Education courses that educators are very good at teaching, or should be very good at teaching their students, but I think they also have a role to play in teaching the public, and that maybe this is one area where teachers need to step forward and educate the public about what to expect about assessments. But I guess my question for you is, beyond the teacher's role, how do you see us making the leap to different kinds of assessments than what we're used to seeing?
You know, one issue you're hitting on that is probably a touchy issue with people, but I think it's absolutely crucial. We're not going to make a lot. We have really deprofessionalized teachers. So think about it. If you were a really good teacher of reading, you know that if a kid has a reading problem, it could be one of dozens of things, and that you need to know the history and trajectory of that kid. And really good reading teachers sit down with the parent, just like a good clinician does, and shows them the entire profile of that child and what can be done. That teacher's knowledge is now trumped by a test made in Illinois given on one day at one time. And as long as we keep that up, and it just simply says we don't expect the same professionalism from teachers that we do from our game designers. So one good way would be to re-professionalize teachers. Whether we'll do that or not, I don't know. The only other good way is going to be to have demonstration sites that make it so clear what good learning people are getting that people will demand it.
Mm-hmm. Next
Thank
question.
Hi, Felissa Kramer from Gotham Schools. So a little bit more about teachers. In a world where content is delivered in the same place that assessment happens, what's the teacher's role in designing what content gets delivered? What would be the teacher's role in a world where this is the assessment? What would be the teacher's role in controlling what happens in her classroom?
Well, we didn't have time for that, and that'll be another talk, but so I'll just say it very shortly. This requires, some people have argued, well, this means we don't need teachers. Far from it. It requires a very different sort of teacher. It's just the way a game designer designs experience that mentors you and guides you to problem solutions of the sort Dan is talking about that allow you to make good choices and also to innovate. Teachers will have to become designers of people's learning, resources of people's learning, and design experiences for them to have that lead them to this sort of problem solving and conceptualization innovation. So they're going to have a more important role, but it's not going to be the role of telling everybody all the facts they need to know. By the way, it's much like the role that good graduate advisors have with PhD students. That's really what we're talking about. And by the way, until we wrecked that, that was the one area of our education system that was working.
So I might disagree a little bit with that. So we actually do a lot of work on instruction, and it turns out when we use our assessments, we're able to figure out which kinds of instruction help kids achieve those things on the assessments. And I happen to value the outcome that's on the assessments I make. And so we're learning how to create environments where teachers can do the work but not be overburdened. So when I taught English in the inner city in LA, I had 160 kids a day. I'm not mentoring each one, right? So we're trying to make instruction and make it so the teacher can allocate resources in ways that are most effective.
So you don't imagine a time when 60% or a large percentage or all of a student's time is spent in this learning environment?
I like sports. And I like to be outside. You know, so the idea that you're spending the whole time in there.
But your time in school, I mean, I hear from vendors who are trying to build this, that this is, and some of them seem
Sorry,
like
I may not have understood. Are you saying that I want them spending 60% of the time in front of a computer monitor?
their time, whether we'll convert all of their time in school, if this is a more efficient use of their time to learn, which I think Time to Learn is a company trying to do this. If this is a more efficient use of students' time, why not convert the school day into this learning environment?
This model of learning says that there are all different ways to learn, but they have to be done at the appropriate time. So, for example, even in this game-like learning, there are times in popular culture where people use lectures or where they use direct instruction, but they do it just in time and on demand. You get technical language when you're going to use it so you know what it means, or like in a game like Civilization, it comes with an encyclopedia, but you use it once you know why you'd want to read it. Right, so it's not that there's any particular form of instruction, including lectures, that are bad. It's using them at appropriate times to gain learning. The other thing out of school, and what's going to be sold, are passions. That is, many kids find a passion and get to be pro-ams, true experts in almost anything you could name. And what you're going to see people selling out of school is, you know, in sport, of course, it's traditionally been a passion, but a lot of what people are trying to do is recruit kids' passions, put them into learning communities where they produce stuff themselves and innovate at a very high level. And again, a lot of privileged kids are already doing this. And so one of the future things schools are going to have, I think, is one of their jobs, helping kids find the passion where they want to put in their 10,000 hours and get to be a real expert in a learning community. That's a futuristic thing. But.
Okay.
Thanks.
Next question.
I'm Sarah Karp with Catalyst magazine, and I was wondering if there's any curriculum that schools are using right now that's closer to what you guys are talking about. Like, I think about everyday math, which is something that we use in Chicago a lot, and that kind of takes some of the things that you guys are talking about, where kids are really taught how to problem solve before they're really taught, like they don't do rote memorization of multiplication tables. They do it in some funny way that I'll never understand, but you know, but it is sort of trying to teach them how to think, not teach them how to memorize. And then I do think that one of the problems in Chicago is then they take a break for the assessments for like 2 months for the standardized test, and they go into this rote memorization, right? And then they go back to the everyday math when that's over.
Yeah.
You know, so that they can do good on the ISAT. But I'm wondering if that's what you guys see, and if it's sort of the standardized tests haven't caught up to some of the good curriculum that is out there.
You know, I actually think there's a lot of good curriculum out there. One of the big problems is compliance to the curriculum. So, you know, the people who design these, they make corridors, they've thought hard about what's first, what's second, what are the right activities. You know, some are more tilted towards pushing symbols, and some are more tilted towards, you know, kids as little junior scientists. But they're all pretty good curriculum. But the compliance problem is really a big problem. And some of the problem with compliance is that people are saying, yeah, but I know what's on that test. I know those kinds of questions, so I'm going to deviate from the curriculum, or I'm going to interpret the curriculum a particular way.
You know, the issue is really not that curriculum that demands that people use facts as tools to solve problems in ways that get deep learning and not just superficial learning is not new. If you think about it, and Dan's been part of old projects like the Jasper project and others that did this very, very well. He's much older than I am, by the way. And, but in the 80s, when we had this story that Japan was beating us economically because they were producing everybody as a knowledge worker, we put into our schools learning that was deep and conceptual and in communities of learners. We did it after Sputnik. But by the 90s, when we saw that the real break, we were hegemonic again economically. Japan was going down the tubes, and we saw that the break on modern economies is service workers, 3/5 of all workers. Then we just dropped that. So it's actually, you know, the one thing we could use from you guys is make up a crisis. Right?
We don't have enough.
Jeff Kwiatkowski at K-12 Incorporated. I found it interesting. You did a great presentation about how video games can provide great assessments. And just a week or so ago, you know, the president and many others were saying, everybody shut off your video games and focus on the tests or focus on your schoolwork. You know, what you're talking about here is really revolutionary in how to incorporate it nationwide. You know, the policy barriers to actually implement something like that of that magnitude are tremendous. So I guess I have two questions. First is, have there been any policymakers at any level, state or federal level, that have been sort of receptive to this sort of revolutionary thinking? And secondly, you know, the focus on that type of assessment is, you know, right on the learner, yet we've created this structure in the United States that is suggesting it's assessing the student, but it's mostly assessing schools.
Right.
So how
And
do you
teachers.
link those two together so you can create this sort of revolutionary new assessment model that can both assess the student and also assess the schools and the school districts?
Well, so
and the policy. Have
on
anybody
the second one, I mean, I
championed
think
this?
our ability now to get more information, analyze it more ways, and that information gets richer, it becomes the sort of information base that teachers, students, supervisors, parents can all use as it's massaged differently for different purposes. And we can also use it to evaluate the effectiveness of stuff. I mean, there's many companies now, Dreambox, which just got sold, is a math set of games for children, but it keeps copious information and customizes each new thing the kid gets to where the kid is, right? And therefore, that information is rich enough to give you, both policymakers and leaders, some information about what they ought to be doing, plus it's helping the kids. So I think that we can do much better with getting our information up. There are a lot of people who are receptive. The congressman who's the head of the education committee has been to several of these, very receptive. You know, I view the problem leaving aside the polarization of our politics, which makes it impossible to do almost anything, even in an unpolarized world. Think about the energy thing. It would be very, very expensive to go to solar energy in the beginning. But once you went to solar energy, it would be very, very cheap. All innovation has a high price in the beginning, and then it saves you a lot of money. So in this case, if you built learning so well that you could track the choices people are making moment by moment and even help them make better choices so that you knew, like in a total quality control, when the child's going off and you're always maintaining them, so you're guaranteed at the end of 12 weeks of algebra they could actually do algebra, there would be no testing industry. Think of the savings. Immense savings. So the problem here is the willpower, just as with the energy thing, to start the innovation. And that's why I think the only chance we have, and it's closing quickly, is to hive off, just as we did with cancer and and other things, a center that would push the beginnings until we drove the price down of this stuff. And then in the end, I think the system would be not only more efficient, it actually would be cheaper.
Next question, quickly. Move up.
Nick Anderson with the Washington Post. So when I think about these issues, a lot of times I listen to people talk about skills and content, and sort of standards need to have skills and content in them. And a lot of times people talk about rigor too. And if things aren't rigorous, they probably don't have that much content in them, right? So you got to load up some more content. And I think people, policymakers and parents and folks, they like rigor just as a concept. They want stuff to be more rigorous. How do you square what you want with the desire for rigor?
Oh, I want rigor.
And
we don't have rigor even close to it. See, think about how many people know what Yu-Gi-Oh is, this card game with 10,000 cards? It's got more content than any 800-page textbook. If you've ever read the cards, it's in technical language. The kids are playing a game and learning content that would make you dizzy. And why? Because they're not memorizing the content. They're playing the game, but you can't play the game unless you learn all of this content. So I want that sort of effectiveness. So let me give you another example. David Schaefer at the University of Wisconsin does what he calls epistemic games. The kids are in a world like SimCity where they replan Madison and have to do, middle school kids, they have to do so as a professional. They have to get the economy right, the sociology, the environmentals, and they have to answer the mayor, they got to speak to the green groups, then they have to write an urban planning report and present it to a real urban planner or the mayor in professional language. Now, it turns out there's 300 codes to do planning decisions. Traditional education would teach the 300 codes and then you could play the game. They just play the game, but they have to be professionals. They have to use the codes. At the end, they all know the 300 codes cold, and they can't remember how they learned them. That's much more rigorous. A person who can replan Madison and face the mayor in middle school, that's rigor.
Next question.
Well, my name is Mike Bowler. I'm a retired education writer and editor, and currently proud U.S. Census enumerator. One of you a little while ago said, sort of tossed off the remark, except for McGraw-Hill. And I'm sitting there thinking, why hasn't McGraw-Hill and the others in this testing oligarchy, why haven't they, particularly if they're getting $1 billion a day or whatever you said, why haven't they gotten onto it? Why haven't they?
Have. Every one of them has, and I've visited every one of them. Every Pearson, McGraw-Hill, they all have digital units. In fact, Pearson's digital unit is in Phoenix, right next to me, and I've visited it many times. They're not going into this whole hog for the same reason our coal industry doesn't want to see change. People have told me directly, we are very well aware that if the future is what you're saying, we're going to go broke. And by the way, some of their own employees have told them that. But they're not willing to give up the profits of these textbooks until the well is dry. They very much feel caught in a bind. None of them want to get caught in the future when this stuff changes, but none of them are willing now to give up the thing. And I think it's human, but there's not one of these publishers is not well aware that the future may put them out of business.
Final two questions.
Hi, my name is Julie Mack. I'm from the Kalamazoo Gazette in Michigan. What you're saying I find is really interesting, but it seems to me one of the big crises in education is really literacy skills, in urban education particularly. And so how would you use what you're describing to teach literacy skills?
See, the trouble with literacy, you guys as journalists in education probably know the 4th grade slump literature. That is, the kids who learn to read and pass the 3rd grade reading test can't read in 4th grade. We've known about it for 35 years, and you could have predicted that No Child Left Behind would have that effect and then enrich us researchers yet more to solve the problem we caused. The fact is that it's caused by the fact that to be a successful reader in school, it's not enough to read. You have to be able to read to learn, and more importantly, you have to read complex language, the sort of stuff that's in your chemistry book, which no one likes, and certainly you don't want your kids seeing it for the first time in chemistry. Do you know the biggest correlate with a kid's school success for all of grades from 2nd on is their oral vocabulary at 5. That's because they're getting ready for the orientation to school-based academic language. Now, I go home and read a Yu-Gi-Oh card. Read one. Or at worst, go to the rule set where I've watched 7-year-olds get on the internet to do it, and it's written, first of all, you won't understand the words, and don't feel bad about it. Ask your kid. So we have our 7-year-olds reading PhD language at home, and going and reading decodable text in the vernacular language at school, and wonder why we have a reading problem. Kids' literacy is higher than it's ever been when they're out of school. Go to pro-am sites. See if you can understand any of it. Go to a World of Warcraft forum where they're debating the statistical underlying models. Your eyes will cross. My student and now a faculty member at the University of Wisconsin, Constance Steinkuhler, has just shown for high school kids, these are boys who are not doing very well at school, who are in a World of Warcraft guild, that they can only read a school book at a 5th grade level, but they can read technical literature on World of Warcraft at a college level. So that's literacy. I mean, you know, and of course, most teachers did know you can read better what you know about and what you care about.
Next question.
Hi, my name's Michael Chandler. I'm with the Washington Post, and I work in Virginia where they tried for the past few years a portfolio-style test for special ed kids and kids who are learning English as a second language. And the administrators and a lot of testing experts really like this kind of test, and it's a much more sophisticated kind of test and can meet kids where they are in their different learning styles. However, they're now going to discontinue this test because the state's worried it was being gamed, overused. What happened is the kids who took the portfolio, their pass rates were sky high. Almost all of those kids passed the portfolios. So the kids in special ed were doing a lot better than everyone else. So questions are like, do you imagine a test that is potentially a more valuable test where there's more learning happening, where a teacher learns more about their student, how they learn? Can you standardize that kind of test, really, and compare school system to school system? Or would this all happen outside of the kind of
great
accountability
question.
system as we know it?
It's a great question. So Singapore, who's very interested in innovation and often comes through and asks if they have something they can copy to be innovative.
Right.
They have the same concern. It's sort of like, well, but if they're supposed to learn on the test and that form gets out, everybody will learn before they take the test.
What a shame. You know, one of the key things, though, that you're bringing up is it isn't really just a question of standardization. Any test you give to everybody as the accountability measure will be gamed. Guaranteed. It is the only true way to, if you want to do the standard stuff, is not to use a test given to everybody, because you teach it. You know, this is a proposal that the guy who founded Princeton Review was making. Now he's an entrepreneur. Let's let every educational innovation flourish and correlate every one of them with a NAEP score, or a PISA score, or a better test if you could make one, but that is not given to everybody. Therefore, you couldn't game it because you can't teach to it because it's not given to everybody, and we'd be able to compare, you know, a right-wing proposal and a left-wing without any politics. If you just, we find, see, NAEP has a lot of problems, but it's way better than Arkansas's test. So, you know, the point is that unless we have a test we can correlate it with that is not given to everybody, and where all the players agree that, you know, that's good, we're just playing a game, because even if we make up some of Dan's stuff and we give it to every kid, they will teach it, they will game it and cheat on it if it's the accountability measure is going to punish them for the kids not all getting past some arbitrary gate.
So let me make it more optimistic, given that you might think that gaming is bad. So like World of Warcraft, on the back end, they're analyzing all this data, and they discover that they've made a quest in there that too many people are getting right, and they change it because they're getting so much information in. I mean, this is sort of the part that the portfolio assessment's really labor intensive, but if you have this digital back end that's picking this stuff up and you can look for patterns, you can sort of adjust tests in real time. So rather than evaluating the tests in clinical trials where you compare group A to group B, you just say, can we keep improving it? Can we keep making it better for each group? So there's probably ways to solve this problem.
Now, last question.
Hi, I'm Beth Ferdig. I'm from WMIC in New York, and I'm freezing, which is why I'm wearing my coat.
Welcome to San Francisco in the summer.
I know. I wrote a book about literacy called Why Can't You Teach Me to Read? Just in case you all want to buy it. It came out last September, and I read a lot of your stuff, James, about the literacy, well, about the gaming and how that is an approach to learning, because one of the kids who I was profiling, Antonio, who Greg Topper wrote about, is a dyslexic guy who dropped out of school at 17. He got to maybe like a 4th or 5th grade reading level with some help, but I would watch him play these video games. And he was reading by having to advance to the next level in a lot of these combat games. But I would not say that he was reading at a PhD level, as some of the kids that you're describing who use these video games. And I would also say that while it gave him a lot of strengths in helping him with his reading, he didn't read anything beyond those video games.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up, because there's a common misconception. I don't think any misconception has been bigger than I get in interviews with the media. No technology, including books or games, are good for you or bad for you, right?
Right.
It depends what you do with them. Those World of Warcraft boys are in a guild run by Constance, where she is connecting it to other things, mentoring and designing stuff. You know, so we're not saying, oh, hand the person a technology. We're saying hand them a mentoring system, a learning system, this preparation for future learning, resources. It's not a magic potion, nor were books, by the way. You can hand a person a book, they still can't necessarily read it. They need the system to do that.
That's
now, the
what
dyslexic the dyslexic like that, I mean, look, in a reading thing, this is just a simple, I think this is a fact, I think the research supports that it's a sad fact, but if you don't teach a kid to read by the 1st grade, then they have an 85% chance of being behind in school in the 8th grade. Okay, so we say every kid should read by 3rd grade. If you don't teach them to read by the 1st grade, 85% will be behind. And if you don't teach them to read to learn early on, they're going to be in the 4th grade slump. So waiting till a kid is in 4th grade or middle school with no reading skills and then bemoaning and we couldn't do much is a real problem, because it turns out that with the way reading works, it is a very difficult problem to leave it late.
I guess what I wanted to ask you, though, just to sum up with this, is have you seen anyone adapt this in a in a good way for the classroom environment? Because if Antonio is an example of a kid who could definitely read more when he was presented with the video game,
So
he also
yeah.
really learned once he started texting with his cell phone because he wanted to meet girls, and he got on MySpace, and he was
that's a great
suddenly
way
doing that.
Best
and
way
it
to learn a language.
definitely advanced him a lot more, but I haven't seen anyone put all this stuff together.
A lot of startups are starting to do this. You're going to see a lot more, but you could look at Constance Steinkuhler's stuff on the literacy with these she's doing. You can go look at her lab, or David Schaefer's epistemic games. He does this, but they don't do it directly in school.
So, your case is interesting. So these are clinical type issues, right? And suddenly people are more willing to entertain unusual types of solutions. So you see this a lot in sort of the educational neuroscience space, where people are making games that help rehabilitate some difficult problems because they like the motivation. So this is a space where it's on the margin, right? You're not trying to get it into the main class. People are saying, yeah, we want to try something, and this looks like it's going to work, so we're willing to give it a go.
Well,
so that's a place where it's probably going to show up.
This kid was just doing it on his own.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
if people could do it in classrooms, because another person who was writing about literacy said that they're not as intimidated when it's the little screen on their cell phone or on the computer screen as they are when you have a piece of paper that they have to fill out. So
Only
that is
because you scared him before with the books. I mean, he got scared of school. He's not scared. The Army teaches through games. And, and of course, a lot of educators don't like the Army because they're liberals. But the colonel who made America's Army, was asked, why does the Army teach with games at education conferences? And the colonel said, because we take the 17-year-olds you failed with, and if we teach the way you did, this time they die.
Okay. On that pleasant note.
I've been told by our sponsor, though, that there was something we should have mentioned when you asked about had this been done. The MacArthur Foundation has helped support and start a new school in New York that was designed by game designers and not just educators. Katie Salen designed it, a great game designer. It's called Quest to Learn, and it is organized the way we're talking about in many respects. It's experimental. If you Google Quest to Learn or Institute of Play, you can find all the documents. Now, the interesting thing about the planning document is that whether you like it or not doesn't matter. You will never have thought of this before, and you'll realize that in education, we miss 80% of the possibilities. Right? Letting game designers do this at least got something. The tests are called boss battles. So, anyway, so Google that.
Please join me in thanking the MacArthur Foundation for bringing two such great presenters. Thank you.